Since President Obama left office, he's gone jet skiing, he signed a Netflix deal, and he advocated for young people's political engagement. But besides a wave of 2018 endorsements and a few social media posts, the former president has avoided taking an active role in the current political landscape. When he has spoken, he's talked about the dissolution of norms or of cancel culture.
A new piece by Jacob Bacharach examines how the 44th president has spent his time out of office so far compared with other former free world leaders. It also asks the question, what is President Obama's role in the current Democratic Party and 2020 election? Joining us via Skype to share more is Jacob himself. He's a contributing writer at The Outline. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your piece was essentially in reaction to this moment of Obama calling out the idea of cancel culture and people trying to be super woke online. So let's take a look at that.
You know, this idea of purity and you're never compromised and you're always politically woke and all that stuff, you should get over that quickly. The world is messy. There are ambiguities. But I do get a sense sometimes now among certain young people, and this is accelerated by social media, there is this sense sometimes of the way of me making change is to be as judgmental as possible about other people. And that's enough. Like if I tweet or hashtag about how you didn't do something right or used the wrong verb, or then I can sit back and feel pretty good about myself because, man, you see how woke I was? I called you out.
So, Jacob, what did you take from that moment? Sagar and I actually debated it on the show. Like, was he kind of trying to stick up for Joe Biden? What parts of woke culture was he calling out? What did you take from it?
I'm not sure that he necessarily had a specific target. I think that it's an easy rhetorical foil for a certain strand of political centrism that is not terribly interested in popular mobilization and therefore takes any opportunity to look at the political engagement of people, which happens in this day and age often on social media and in social fora, as an unnecessary complexity in what should be a more sort of elite mediated process. So I think it's a sort of establishment of an easy straw man, this idea of political purity, when in fact it's a reaction to people attempting to rhetorically utilize their principles to move the window of acceptable conversation in a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Jacob, the other way I also looked at it was, I thought it was almost a defense of some of his own record while he was president, because I mean, so much of it is it's almost unacceptable right now in the Democratic primary or in the media to question some of Barack Obama's legacy and some of his own handlings of many of the problems that have arose because a direct result in some cases of his presidency. That's kind of how I read it. What'd you think?
Yeah, and in fact, I think that there's a really interesting irony here because his presidency, he was propelled into the presidency by a sort of a massive grassroots political movement and political coalition, which as soon as he became president was effectively demobilized. And in particular, you saw, I think, the energy of the anti-war movement really dissipate very soon after he took office. And then his presidency was in fact marked by a heavy reliance on rhetoric rather than on grassroots political action. And so I think, as I said, there's a certain irony in him coming back to then now criticize people for engaging in political rhetoric and not in political action, when in fact, that was, I think, one of the hallmarks of the entire Obama movement.
Right. Well, because that movement wasn't just demobilized, he demobilized it intentionally. I mean, it was basically like disbanded, like I'll bring in the Goldman Sachs guys, I'll bring in the Clintonites, I'll bring in the experts, we've got it from here, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. And I think that those choices, and particularly choices of folks like Tim Geithner to come in and sort of set economic policy, really laid a lot of the groundwork for the popular discontent that led to the electoral results that we saw in 2016. I think that it's very naive of us not to look back at the failures of the Obama presidency to address popular economic woes and other social disunion and social discohesion within the broader American society, and focus only on saving those sort of elite institutions with the hope that that would then trickle down to everyone else, that ultimately, again, contributed, if not caused, the election of Donald Trump.
Right, and Jacob, I mean, I think that's why you called it "Okay, President Boomer," because that really does kind of it exemplifies a very boomer mentality. Just explain that a little bit for the viewers. We've been talking about this a lot, but I think it's funny.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna get myself in trouble here. I've sometimes said, that the idea of generational cohorts is not a good one, and I think that probably most political scientists and demographers would tell you that generational cohorts don't really exist. But I sort of have always said generational cohorts are fake, except for the boomers, who are real and the enemy. But I do think that there is a tendency among that generation, especially those who have been in or are in political power, to dismiss the younger generation and those who are attempting to engage and speak in a different political language than we grew accustomed to in the 90s and even into the early 2000s. And I think that we've had enough think pieces about how millennials are ruining society and politics. So I think a little turnabout is fair play here, and to take some body shots at the generation who are currently in political power is it's legitimate, and they ought to be able to take a couple punches to the jaw and survive, I think.
Well, and I think part of what you're getting at, and part of what Cyrus is getting at, is if you are part of that generation, you're part of what created this system that is such a problem, right? I mean, that's so rotten to its core, and basically, has deindustrialized the country, has people so distrusted and in such despair that they're literally killing themselves either through actual suicide or through addiction, etc. But if you really look at that, then you have to admit that you were part of the problem creating this system. And so that's part of the thing with President Obama, too. I mean, I don't see that he's ever reckoned with the fact that his presidency led directly into Donald Trump's presidency.
Well, I agree. And I think that there is a legitimate... I am in some senses sympathetic to the argument that he was hamstrung, if not from the moment of his election, at least from the first midterms after his election when the Democrats lost Congress. I am sympathetic to that argument. And I'm also sympathetic to the fact that there is an obvious and undeniable element of racial backlash that led to the just absolute intransigence of his congressional counterparts during the majority of his presidency. And so I want to sort of add those in as caveats. But all that having been said, he persistently sort of negotiated against himself and sort of began the negotiation already in the center, constantly moving rightward. The consequence of that was he either didn't get anything done, or he only got things done that helped sort of the established institutional structures within this country. And at the end of the day, that did produce some popular resentment and backlash. And to go back to sort of the earlier part of this conversation, also contributed to that deliberate demobilization, which I think we saw then when we got to the 2016 elections. We saw that manifest itself in a lack of popular turnout, which was partly in response to Hillary Clinton's uninspiring candidacy, but was also partly the result of having a demobilized leftist coalition.
Yeah. Well said, Jacob. We really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Next on Rising, financial crisis of 2008. It started with a collapse in the housing markets.
But what happened to all those foreclosed homes and the people who were in them? Journalist Aaron Glantz tells us how the wealthy turned people's home losses into their massive financial gains when Rising continues.